Okay, so last class we initiated this discussion around two questions. One, why should we tax? And then the next, which was what exactly do we mean by income? Because that becomes a very critical base, which then will be taxed. In that context, we saw this proposition by the German scholar Kleinwatscher, who was basically or non uh, how clean who in rising would have all these range of incomes, apparently the benefits of that he derived by accompanying the prince, and yet at the same point of time might be not really be happy with what he's being made to of income. One will inherently be faced up with these difficulties of one scoping that income.
Ma'am,
Yeah,
can you start once again? Your voice was breaking a lot.
is it okay? Okay, there the net is really unstable at my place. Let me just start around. Okay, okay. It's like I try to avoid the noise in the office, then the internet here is unstable. Let me just start over again. Is this better?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, yeah. Let me just start out again. See, the point which I was making is since last class, we had been thinking around these two critical questions. One was to ask ourselves, why do we need taxation? Having engaged with that question, we were then looking into these kinds of real time issue as to what do we understand by income, because income is something which will is essentially a critical part of the base which will be taxed, and hence all those kinds of purposes and goals that we want to attain. It is in that respect that we had gone through this uh, definition, or you could say these kinds of flagging of concerns by this scholar, the German scholar Kleinwatscher, who was alerting us to this kind of a reality that the moment you would want to have a comprehensive definition of incomes, you will land up including not only cash incomes, but also non cash incomes. And the moment you then engage with the non cash incomes, the difficulties that you will run into is that you will be faced up with all those kinds of imputed and psychic incomes. Remember that unhappy secretary of the prince who on the face of it is receiving all these kinds of benefits of attending those lavish lunches and dinners that the prince partakes, or having access to all those kinds of balls and parties which the prince attends, but nevertheless for whom these are actually the burdens of his duties, right? That's where the point which Kleinwatscher makes is that you will be faced up with the difficulties of one, identifying the incomes. Hmm. Second, even if you have, let's say, identified, you will find it difficult to measure them. Third, even let's say by any matter of chance, if you also are able to measure it, the incomes which you will land up getting will not remain comparable, because the fact is that what one is deriving in terms of these imputed incomes is different from individual to individual, right? Remember when we last closed the class, I was just putting across this point that, sometimes the individuals will have different kinds of approaches towards these kinds of imputed incomes, and that's where the kind of psychic incomes which they derive from these imputed incomes will also be different, right? So if you are someone who is an extrovert, who likes to meet new people, who likes to strike conversations with strangers, you would apparently be very happy with the kind of corporate getaways which your company or your firm might arrange for you. On the other hand, if you are someone who is very selectively social and would want to find recluse in your own world which you have created, you might just want to, sit quietly, read a good book, by all by yourself. And then if you are forced to attend those kinds of corporate getaways, these two individuals and the kinds of incomes which they will derive out of that same situation are not comparable, right? So that's the kind of the difficulty which Clean Watcher has been flagging for all of us. Nevertheless, of course, these kinds of conceptualizing of incomes are critical, because for any system to operate, you will have to have some ground within which you will then be able to further place your entire tax system. Another set of scholars and economists whose definitions with respect to income have been found to be highly influential are the definitions given by these American economists, Robert Haig and Simons, okay, Henry Simons. Robert Haig and so, G. Robert Haig and Simons. Their definitions are popularly known as the Haig Simons definition. Okay, um, essentially, what is being proposed in terms of this kind of the definition which Haig provided for is, and this is what he suggested: income is the money value of the net accretion to one's economic power between 2 points of time. Let me just type this out for you. According to the definition which Robert Haig suggested, income is the money value of the net accretion to one's economic power between 2 points of time. Now, this seems to be a bit vague in terms of what exactly one is trying to provide in terms of the definition. Simons is perceived as having improvised upon this kind of proposition, and this definition is something which has caught attention of a lot of policymakers and legislators. In simple terms, Simons defined income as an algebraic sum of, number one, the market value of rights exercised in consumption, and second, the change in the value of the store of property rights between the beginning and between the end of a given period, right? So essentially, the definition which Simons have provided is, what is income? Income is nothing but, okay, excuse the typos which are there on the whiteboard. It can be later on corrected. I'll also send out that reading which is comprising of all these discussions. The conceptualizing of income which Simons is proposing is, income is nothing but a sum of your consumption plus change in the wealth of that particular individual, right? That's how the personal income is sought to be defined. Consumption that you are doing plus any kind of change in the wealth which you possess, right? And this is something which is being propounded as a kind of a, ground on which you can then, work ahead to come up with your own definitions. What about all those kinds of imputed incomes and the psychic incomes, etc., which the clean watcher theory had been alerting to us about? Simons goes on to respond to say that, all right, when one is engaging into these kinds of self-providing services, right, or even does not work at all, leisure in itself is also some kind of consumption, right? So his proposition is, he's not negating the fact that it will be difficult for one to either measure or to identify these kinds of, imputed or psychic incomes. Simons is just saying that they are not relevant for the purposes of arriving at a conceptualizing of income. The the idea is that whether you sit around doing nothing, hmm, or whether you are engaging into that kind of self-providing services, the activities which are in terms of these non-market services, they should be irrelevant to this kind of a conceptualizing, right? Now, this is something which was being proposed. Of course, we haven't really addressed these kinds of real kind of issues, very pressing issues, which Watcher had provided in terms of, these kinds of propositions. Because see, if you are saying that leisure and these kinds of self-providing activities are irrelevant, and the fact that they are themselves some kind of consumption, the proposition is that you can in fact even measure your hours which you are spending in leisure in this kind of self-providing services in money terms. Which means Simon's perception somewhere is that even that is something measurable, and yet you keep it aside. We do not want to mix it in our income conceptualizing. We just segregated being non-marketable services, something however which is capable of being measured, right? So of course the counter which is being given is that, all right, then what about those people who are like, who are unemployed, right? Or those who really do not actually value the leisure time. What do we do for those set of people? What kind of income measurements will you attribute to those kinds of individuals, right? So nevertheless, these are the kinds of conceptualizings which are in some way or the other not very complete in themselves, right? Because not all of these theorists will hold answers to every some such kind of a issue or a concern which is being flagged. In fact, at some point of time, even Simons was, quoted as saying that the problem is clearly hopeless, right? So everyone who has tried to define income has struggled with doing so. Um, Apart from these two, there is one very essential concept of income which was again being forwarded by another American economist. His name is E.R.A. Seligman, and his definition was also something which had quite a influence, and people actually took note of the suggestion that had come through his propositions. Uh, let's just try to break his definition also down and see how all these various concepts of incomes have actually played out in the real world. Seligman was putting across this concept of income as income according to him. Okay, yeah, I'll come to that. The donations, in fact, the savings part, right? That is something which, in Simon's definition, will be taken care of by virtue of this aggregation which he's doing, right? So if one was saving something, and that saving of something led to the change in your wealth, the savings part was taken care of in the wealth. When you were leading or when you were trying to conceptualize donation, in a way you were consuming that kind of part, and hence is being taken care of under the concept of consumption, right? So you do have all those kinds of ifs and buts in each of these conceptualizing, and remember, these are all theorists. They provide us with all those kinds of background material. Then what actually transpires in your statutory definition will be something which is a call of the policymaker and the legislators. But yes, this very all these kinds of other activities which were there, which in terms of donation, it's not the individual who is actually consuming it, right? You are contributing it to the society. So those kinds of difficulties, yes, they would continue to persist. Uh, Now, this whole idea about income which Seligman propounded, in fact, when you read the literature, it comes through that Seligman had propounded two different definitions of income. And the other one was in terms of an essay, a very seminal essay, which he had written, Our Stock, our Dividend Stock. So, that essay is something which he had submitted to the Supreme Court of America. And this was also a very celebrated kind of conceptualizing. Now, income, therefore, according to the proposition of Seligman, is nothing but, just a moment, it is nothing but inflow of all satisfaction that comes from utilities and services. Now, what does this inflow of all satisfaction that comes from utilities and services means? Is it something which is akin to the consumption which Simons was suggesting? Is it something altogether different? Seligman himself conceded that this will be very vague kind of statement as a kind of concept to be engaged with. So he further refines it by saying that, see, in a market economy which is transacting in money, hmm, this kind of an income is to be understood as inflow of all those satisfactions that can be parted for money. Hmm. Utilities in those sense of terms will therefore be the benefits which are being derived from tangibles and intangible properties. Services will be all those kinds of benefits which one is deriving from human efforts. Let us just use an example to understand what does this statement mean, that in a market economy which is transacting in money, income is inflow of all satisfaction that can be parted with for money. What does this essentially mean? Let's check this example out. Let's assume there is some work in your house which requires repair. Let's say some electricity work. You call in an electrician, and because you are transacting in an economy which is operating on money, how will the income be conceptualized under this kind of a definition? The electrician who will provide you with the services, the satisfaction that will come to you as a service recipient, is this kind of a pleasure, or that use of that service which you derive, that becomes your income. For the electrician, it is this kind of a parting of his services, his human efforts which he is doing, for which he will receive the money. So the income for this electrician is the money. The income for the service recipient is this satisfaction which he derives from this kind of a service which was provided. And because you are transacting into money, money becomes this kind of an income which is inflow, right? And hence, for the electrician, that money which you gave becomes his income, right? Similarly, let's say you are owning a house property, and being the owner, you are parting with a certain portion of your house, you are renting it out to someone. So, for the occupier, income will be understood as a satisfaction of residing in that particular portion of the house. For the owner, income will be the satisfaction which he is deriving in terms of receiving the money, right? So you have on one end satisfaction which is coming in terms of money. On the other hand, the other party has a satisfaction which is in terms of the benefit which that party is deriving on account of this kind of a parting which is happening, right? So in this sense of terms, when we understand the concept of income as propounded by Seligman, income is always considered as this kind of an inflow, which is income is understood as, or income is denoted as, satisfactions which are coming in successions. Okay, income denotes all these kinds of satisfactions coming in succession, right? Inflows of these satisfactions, of all these satisfaction, depending upon what party you are, during a given time, right? So that's where you have that kind of a year. Whatever inflows are coming in through these kind of satisfactions will be considered as your income. However, okay, let me just see. Observation or a question of sort in the chat box. Wouldn't the income definition be very wide in this case, because it is also accounting for the happiness or services which we get? And in effect, it is including everything that we do daily, and it will be difficult for the assessors to know the actual income of the individuals, right? See, precisely this kind of a point which is being made. Somewhere, all these theorists, what they were trying to put across is, when we conceptualize income, they were somewhere trying to put across or buttress this point that income conceptualizing is not only accounting standards, or it is not only from the viewpoint of accounting, it is also something which is other than accounting. The moment you have these kinds of perceptions which are being generated, it obviously becomes very difficult to start measuring them in terms of satisfactions, right? Why? Precisely, again, it's like, see, it keeps going back and forth, right? So the theorists would say that it's not, this exercise is not merely a technicality in terms of reducing something to accounting principles or to arrive at some value, but precisely for all practical sense of terms, you will have to do that, because otherwise, how will you ever be able to come at a particular base, right? As is being very rightly pointed in this, chat which has come across, that by that reason, any kind of happiness or services that you receive will also need to be reduced into these kinds of inflows, right? Which again brings us back to that flagging which Clean Watcher had made about the imputed and the psychic incomes, right? And hence money somewhere gave us that kind of a standardizing, that all right, whatever is inflow, right? And mind you, this is an inflow only in terms of that money which ultimately gets counted in your practical sense of terms. That's how they try to put this across. But mind you, these theorizing has also helped us in the sense that even when all these satisfactions etc are being proposed, it has certain attributes. Number one is, all these satisfactions that we are trying to put across and trying to then assimilate to arrive at what income one actually derived during the given period, it is always those which were realized and not the ones which were realizable. Okay, this is also coming in as a kind of an alert from the theorist himself, that see, even when one is trying to put across all these kinds of inflows of satisfactions, what one is actually taking on board are the satisfactions which were realized and not the ones which were merely realizable. And there's a difference between the two. The incomes which one is putting across in this kind of a formula are the ones which you could actually realize, and not merely the anticipation of them being realized, right? The anticipation part has to be set aside. You need some realized kind of a satisfaction, the actual satisfaction, and not merely an anticipated one. Anticipation of a satisfaction is of no consequence within the purposes of this kind of income definitions which we are trying to put across. The second crucial part, if you very closely see, okay, let me just see the chat box comment. Wouldn't counting money also as a satisfaction lead to double measurement of it? Because we count the landlord as receiving the rent as their income, as well as when they spend it on something else? Or would the money become realizable and hence not counted as it is not exactly realized? See, mind you, this is something which is very crucial for all of us to engage with. This is a very good question. When you are dealing with these kinds of conceptualizing of incomes, you cannot be taxing both the parties at both the ends, right? You have to choose your end. Either you stay with that consumption related understanding of incomes, and that's how you then define your tax base, or you choose this particular side where you are saying that all right, the satisfactions which is coming in money, the one which has been parted for with money, so the rental the house owner who offered that house or a portion of the house on rent and consequently received money, it is that particular end you will tax and not the satisfaction which the occupier derived out of it, right? Because otherwise, if you start taxing both the ends and start having combinations of these, you will not only doubly but multiply start taxing everyone, right? So one will have to be very careful and see what exactly is the end which you are choosing. Either you stay with this consumption tax related kind of notions to say that all right, the moment you are you have this wherewithal that you can really consume someone's services by renting out a property, and the fact that you paid that money, hence all the payments that everyone has been doing throughout the year will be reflecting of your ability to pay, and hence we tax you. That's one part of doing, or that's one manner of doing it. Or the other could be that, all right, the moment you parted with your satisfaction in terms of money, that's the part which we will tax, right? You can't go around taxing everyone for everything that you are doing. Otherwise, it will be chaotic. Uh, Now, remember this. In fact, this definition of Seligman, which is trying to define income as inflow of all these satisfactions during a given period in succession, is something which is very critical in terms of how we have conceptualized income in the practical sense of terms. One is by saying that it is an inflow in succession. So whenever we are conceptualizing income, it is understood as some kind of a stream or a flow of succession, right? This kind of a stream or a flow of succession, flow of satisfaction, sorry, stream or flow of satisfactions in successions is something critical to designate it as income. That would essentially mean is that if your utilities are accumulated, if these are not coming in successions, if these satisfactions are not coming in successions, then they become capital. And the moment they become capital, they cannot be a part of income. Right now, we as we proceed ahead with this course, we will also have to at some point engage with this kind of a choice which different countries have been making at different points of time, whether you would also at any point of time at all want to tax capital, right? Because the question therefore is that if you are perceiving income as this kind of inflow in successions, then those satisfactions which are not in this kind of a stream, right, they are not flowing to you, they are accumulated, they are in store, they become your capital and hence will have to be left out from this concept, right? Have you ever come across this kind of a statement? I'm sure you would have read it somewhere, if you were a commerce student or even otherwise. There's a very popular term which says that income is a flow and capital is a stock. Have anyone come across something of that sort? Yeah. Now, what, from where exactly it is coming? It is coming in from this kind of an understanding, right? Income is a flow and capital is a stock, meaning thereby that any kind of accretions which are happening in this sense of terms are therefore not to be considered as income and therefore should not be taxed. Right now, that's the kind of the policy choices which one will have to make whilst you are trying to come across statutory definitions of incomes. Let me just summarize what all these three different theorists have done for us. Of course, the whole scholarship around income is not only limited to these three. These were the ones who were in the early 19s. Even after that, you have a lot of economists and theorists, the modern ones, right? From Piketty to even earlier to him, Musgrave, right? They all have been providing us with all these range of insights on how you would be able to come up with some workable kind of a notion of income. And yet, if we summarize what is being provided by all these, theorists and how we have shaped our understanding of income. See, in the yesterday's class, when I asked all of you what exactly was income, there are all these kinds of examples that came up, right? Business profits, something which was being, in terms of salary or your employment income. Someone had also pointed out incomes on account of interest, right? Others had also pointed out subsidies and other kinds of things which were coming up. When we are putting across a workable definition of income. All these kinds of items which we just listed, whether it was interest income, rental income, employment income, other kinds of dividend incomes, in that sense of terms, are satisfying this kind of a stream or a flow of satisfactions in successions, isn't it? So this kind of a stream or a flow of satisfactions which keep coming up in succession, right? Because the layperson understanding of income is that, all right, what is income? It keeps coming to you on a regular basis, right? It is periodic in nature. You'll get your salaries every month. Your interests will be due, every on every quarters. Your dividend incomes will be coming to you every year. So there is a necessary kind of a stream which keeps coming to you, which essentially forms your incomes. At the same point of time, we have also considered that apart from these kinds of flows of income, there are also imputed incomes which we would want to get included. Think of it. You must have heard about those fringe benefits which employees receive from their employers. What are those fringe benefits?
Is it
Have you
gratuity?
come across fringe benefits?
Is it called gratuity?
Yeah, I think, Yash, you are trying to speak up a little louder, please, so that we can hear.
Uh, Ma'am, is it called the gratuity amount that the employer gives to the employee?
Okay, see, gratuity is something which is a kind of a gratitude of the employer for you having served for these many years. So, in a way, it is attributable to your employment. When we say fringe benefits, right? It is something which is in the nature of all these kinds of benefits which your employer provides to you. Yes, like insurance premiums, maybe even this kind of, let's say, a club membership. Yes, vacation pays, right? Something which is being, paid to you in terms of, uh, something which you would have otherwise paid, right? So fringe benefit, of course, is again to be distinguished from perquisites. Perquisites is something which is different, right? Perquisite is something which is being offered to you free of cost, the bill of which is footed by your employer. Uh, Fringe benefits is something which is like this kind of, a collective payment, or collective benefit which is being given, right? Like this kind of a getaway, to a resort. So this is arranged for the employees and all their families, right? And everyone, this is a kind of a team exercise, a group exercise. Those kinds of incomes should also be included. Think in those sense of terms. Even the house property income, once we come to that specific head of income, the house in which you are staying for residential purposes, two houses are exempt. If you now have a third house, despite the fact that you have not let it out, the legislation will deem as if you have let out that property and that you are earning income out of it, right? It is the inherent capacity of that house to generate income which is being taxed, notwithstanding the fact whether or not you are actually letting out that property or not, right? It becomes it is a partial kind of a, uh, inclusion of an imputed income, right? So all those kinds of self servicing that you are doing, they are not taken into account. But the fact that you are having all these number of houses to yourself, that is something which becomes a part of your imputed income. Uh, Also, do remember this. Even for income tax purposes, we have this very standard kind of foundational and very fundamental understanding that it is incomes which are only the ones which are only realized, real ones, which will be taxed, and not the one which is, merely existing in fiction, right? So the incomes which you will be taxing are the ones which are realized, and not the one which are just existing somewhere. You can't conjure up something from the air and say, all right, this is your income, right? You need something which is real and concrete for it to be taxed. Very essentially, what we have also done for the purposes of income tax in India is, come to think of it, we do tax the gains on capital, but we do not tax any kind of accretion to the capital, right? So this point which Simons was making, that all right, what is income? Income is equal to consumption plus the change in the wealth that you possess. Uh, that change, right, or that accretion which is happening, or the appreciation which is happening, that is something which does not form part of your income. Say, for example, the houses in which you all are staying at the moment, assuming that it is the house under the ownership of one of your parent, the house would have appreciated in its value from what it was last year to today, and yet that appreciation which has happened will never be brought to tax as your income under the personal income taxes. Why? One, because that appreciation was never realized. Only when you realize it by way of, let's say, parting it for money, like you rent it out, then we can say that, all right, now it has become your income. But otherwise, mere appreciation of that house property value will not be a part of your, incomes. Uh, of course, then what about other kinds of elements that we have been discussing on and off, like your savings or like, donations and other some such kinds of subsidies, right? So this is also, especially when we speak about subsidies, whether the businesses receive it or whether it is subsidized by your employer for you, those do become a part of your income, right? For businesses, it's a little further nitpicking that happens there, whether the subsidies for it is capital or it is revenue in nature, so that difference we make. But these subsidies, when you receive, they do become a part of your income. When you set aside certain incomes, in the sense of the incomes which you did not, purely speaking, consume, since savings, let's say, as a matter of policy, if the government wants to incentivize, they would offer you all those kinds of deductions, right? That all right, you've been a virtuous citizen, a virtuous assessee, you have been saving up a lot. Of course, interest which you earn will be this kind of a stream of flow of incomes, and hence will be included. But the FD which you have taken for yourself, right, that amount which you have set aside, that will not be taxed, right? You can't be saying that all right, that is to be taxed. It is, of course, the other thing that if that FD was taken out from business profits or from your salary income or from the pensions that you received, it has already suffered a tax. But the fact that you took out the FD will in itself will not be taxable, right? Donations, again, for that sense of terms, is seen as a virtuous kind of a attribute, and consequently will be rewarded accordingly, right? So do keep in background all these kinds of theoretical underpinnings. As I stated earlier also, these are not the only ones. In fact, each of these scholars and definitions, if you pick up and you would want to read up, you will find n number of literature which is around it. And yet, for the purposes of taxes and the statutes which we are formulating, they do have provided us with some guidance. But see, after all, at the end of the day, as was I was referring to yesterday also, it is a policy choice, right? It is a choice that the society undertakes in terms of how it wants to, define its tax base, right? That's the kind of the political and policy choices which one makes, something which is a workable kind of a definition, something which is measurable, something which can be very clearly be identified without any lot of controversies around it, is something which helps us to shape up the definition of income. Hmm? This is all from my side for today's class. In case you have any questions, queries, observations, comments, you might make it in the chat box, or if we are okay with it, then we can stop the recording. Hmm? Fine. Okay, so let's stop here. When we meet next, we will proceed other portions. Thank you.